just don't want to have any kids because I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth the expenses. I don't think it's worth the stress and the health issues I could have otherwise avoided from that stress of raising a child or more than one. I don't think it's worth the potential lack of ability to be able to move from one area to another for the sake of the growth of the child, so that they don't have to worry about finding it difficult to speak another language if you're to move from one country to another or from one continent to another. For basically for the well-being of the child, I just don't think it's worth it, and I definitely don't think it's worth raising a child, particularly because of how I was raised. And I'd rather not raise my child or my children, hypothetically speaking, in a way that my parents raised me, and I don't want to even do that by accident. Those are errors that I don't in any way want to do. For example, having what I'd now consider a purposeless relationship between me as the parent, hypothetically, and the child or the children, hypothetically. And by this, I mean having no problem talking purposelessly about essentially nothing of much value, nothing about elevating the child, or nothing about having a relationship in which the child can elevate the parent and vice versa, of course. No talking about, or even thought to talk about, if there's anything in particular in which the child might dislike about what the parent's doing, and vice versa, and how they can work around that in a way that both parties would deem not only acceptable, but what how they truly want to go about whatever it is, especially in a healthy way as well. I think, especially coming from where I've come from in terms of how I've been raised, it's just not errors that I'd want to make at all, and I don't want my child to have to worry about dying one day. That is a worry that I've had on my mind, and that I might have potentially had many panic attacks over. I definitely have worried and broken down mentally a lot, many times throughout the year at the idea of dying. And although those breakdowns wouldn't be long in time, at least in terms of when I'd explode mentally at the idea of that, when I'd break down a little bit, when I'd stress, or when my stress would come to a height at that idea. Those are just thoughts that I wouldn't want to have, that I wouldn't want to indirectly pass on by giving birth, or by impregnating a lady, which would then lead to the birth of this individual or these individuals, depending on whether I only had one or more than one child. I just don't want to do it. So, in turn, at least at this stage of my life, I'd rather actively not further extend the line of suffering from from a multi-generational standpoint. Now, my siblings have decided to not do that, but although I although from a genetic perspective, there definitely are the genes have been passed on. I want my name to die. I I don't I don't want a kid to have my name, because I don't want to pass on all the shite that I've experienced growing up, especially as a teen, and I don't want to pass on potentially very bad habits and unhealthy and destructive ways of thinking that I might have developed while growing up, and even more recently in my life, from where I've lived and the environment that I've been in. I'd just rather not do it. But anyway, I had a couple of more things that I wanted to talk about, and I'll leave it there. So, here we go. So, I wanted to talk about addictions. Now, this is really to do with screen use. Technology is and probably will always develop for as long as mankind exists, regardless of whether these forms of technology are digital or non-digital. But I'm particularly talking about digital technology. I'm talking about screen use. I've had a I've had an unnecessarily difficult time managing my screen use, and my ability to lead myself definitely isn't what it could be, and definitely hasn't been what it could have been. I think there are definitely quite a few places that I might be able to improve to be able to move forward, but starting off with knowing how I'd want to change would be a good place to start, because even at this point in time I don't know how I'd want to change in particular, other than to not go on the screens basically all day, and to live my life more so in a way that I've done today compared to yesterday, in which, although I have been on screens, I've been on them for a reason. I've had a purpose that I deem valid enough to be on them. And although I might have shown myself that that's the case through being on YouTube and watching it for hours on end, I have let myself be mentally conflicted with that idea, because on one hand I've shown myself that I've been okay with watching videos for hours on end, it just mindlessly consuming videos or content. But on the other hand, when I think about doing that, that doesn't excite me. I don't feel excited by doing that, and I'd only do it when I wouldn't have anything else planned to do, or although I might have had things planned to do, those things that I'd claim I'd want to do on a daily basis aren't in the foreground of my mind because of that addiction. And with screen use, and particularly consuming videos on YouTube, I think that it is an addiction, because I find it difficult to control and manage my screen use, particularly through watching YouTube, in a way that I'd feel comfortable with, or in a way that I, in my mind, would be able to easily control. There, at least very recently anyway, and I don't doubt in the far past throughout the year, this year's worth of time, have had instances in which it seemed as though I just mentally did not have the capacity to be able to control my use. Although in my mind consciously I'd want to stop, I just would not do it, because it seemed as though there's just something that would be stopping me from doing it. Not necessarily a voice in my head, but I just would not stop. And I think that's to do with maybe the dopamine release that I come from watching YouTube videos that people have so often spoken about on YouTube. It seems, especially within the self improvement space, that idea is basically common knowledge at this point. But I think maybe decades down the line, it might be there might be more knowledge to it, and there might be more chemical releases that would have been discovered that would explain why people, at least within these last 2 decades, or these 2 decades, go from 2010 to 2020, then 2020 go to 2030, would explain why it is that there's such an addiction problem with screens, and why it is that there has been potentially a very high increase in ADHD. I don't really know too much about that because I don't do my research on that, but I've heard about that on YouTube, and I definitely don't doubt that that could really be the case. That over the past decade or so, especially since YouTube has become more fully established and video uploading sites like YouTube have become more established, I don't doubt that these have been many platforms which has actually made this place, or made society as we know it, at least within the West, a more brain dead one, and has destroyed our minds by our will. I don't want it to get. I don't want to let myself get any worse, because this definitely could be a starting place in which chips could go into our head and things like that. I definitely do think about what I deem to be a technological dystopia, and I don't want that for myself. But even with technology where it's at today, it seems as though, although the chip might not be in our head physically in the form of a weight, or in grams, I mean, it might not be a specific weight that's plastic or whatever it be that be chipped into our head. It seems like nowadays, at least in the West, people are so integrated with technology that chip, metaphorically speaking, is there anyway. I find it unnecessarily difficult to go about both wherever I be within a building and also on the outside without seeing a fucking screen that someone has on them. And maybe one day it'd be in them. Literally in the head, in the form of a chip. I don't want that. But although that might be far fetched now, the idea of that happening decades down the line, 4 plus, might not be so far fetched. And I think the people, myself included, might be getting to a point where that's basically happening, or that basically has happened at this point, due to it being so socially acceptable to be on screens slash digital technology with no obvious cut-off times, with no limits. Different people would have different rules, so it seemed like as a whole society would be on their digital technology 24/7 essentially. I don't want to be involved in that. I definitely would be, because there's a lot of life that I'd live which would be online, especially within the job, but that's no valid excuse in my opinion to not cut down on screen time, because I definitely could. And to be honest, I technically am on one now via recording on the Canon, even though I can't obviously see